Hi, I'm your host, Bob Powell. We're proud to welcome you to the Exceptional Advisor podcast series brought to you by the Investments and Wealth Institute. This series aims to help you to better serve your clients, differentiate yourself from the competition, and enhance your ability to communicate those differences. In today's episode, I interview Frank Vilcnik, Senior Regional Vice President of New York Life, on wealth transfer and best practices advisors can implement now to better connect with the Gen X, Y, and Z clients that are the future. Welcome to the podcast, Frank.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we get going, for the benefit of our listeners who may not be familiar with you and your background, do you mind giving us an overview?
No, certainly. I'm celebrating 37 years in the business come January, 16 years, 17 years then with New York Life. 10 years prior to that, I ran a program. And the 10 years prior to that, starting in 84, I was on the retail side of the desk.
So a long and storied career.
It has been.
Great to have you here. Before we get going with this topic about building a generation resilient business, let's talk about defining the generations. There's always a lot of discussion around that. Pew, for instance, suggests that Gen Zs were born between 97 and 2012, and millennials or Gen Y were born between 1981 and 96, Gen X between 1965 and 80, boomers between 46 and 1964. How does New York Life and you define these generations?
Well, we go with the same age groups, obviously, but really it's about the opportunity for each of the generations, the X, the Y, and the Z. The Generation X currently is composed of people who are between the ages of 30 and 54. It's actually 65 million people, or about 20% of the population. And over the next few years, between 2032 and 2036, these people will actually inherit about 98% of the wealth transfer opportunity. And then Generation Y is right on their heels. And these are people currently under the age of 39, about 82 million people, and composing about 25% of the current population. So now between the years of 2037 and 2041, it's expected that these people will have an additional 29% of the wealth transferred. They're, after all, next in line after Generation X. And then Generation Z, we don't often talk about them as an investment opportunity just yet, but this is the largest group in our population. These are people born after 1996. There are 86 billion people in this group currently. And it's right now about 26% of the population. And of course, the opportunity to work with this group of people is still emerging. Right.
So often we talk about which generation holds the greatest opportunity, but let's talk first about how the wealth is distributed today.
Well, I mean, the opportunity, I think, is a huge one for all of us financial advisors. We have so many people unprepared in terms of creating estate plans and then talking to their heirs about how they will inherit the wealth, what they're going to do with the wealth. Certainly wealthier people who hopefully would have a better handle on this, but so much of the mass affluent are just winging it. They may have a will, and that's about it. And so as the wealth transfers from the generation that nurtured it and cared for it and grew it to the people who say, hey, I've got $100,000, let me buy that bet now. We have people who wonder what's going on with that extra money. Will it last once it gets into the hands of the heirs? But to your point, how else can it be transferred? Well, with our help, the industry's help, we can certainly talk to them our clients about the benefits of a well-described and a well-thought-out plan to make sure that we transfer wealth in the most efficient, tax-efficient, and also ethically efficient for the heirs manner.
Right. So in terms of how that money will be passed down, gifts, inheritance, a mix of both?
I would agree. Yes. Perhaps not so much in gifts. I mean, those baby boomers are generally reluctant to overly endow, I should say. Now, that's not a blanket statement. Of course, there's always an exception. But yeah, for the most part, I think wealth is going to trickle into the heirs in a rather unexpected way.
So, I mean, at the moment, much of the focus of an advisor might be on their current client and thinking not so much about the younger generation. And this younger generation, according to your research, doesn't necessarily work with an advisor. Why is that? And what can advisors do to sort of cater to that audience?
Well, this is really the generation gap that baby boomers talked about with their parents, the silent generation, or the greatest generation, sorry. And it's really understanding where baby boomers and Generation Y people digressed. Generation X, I'm sorry. Generation X people were latchkey kids for the most part. These were people who took care of themselves after school. They cooked for themselves. They made their own decisions. They didn't grow up with the internet per se, but they started using cell phones and they started learning a little bit about the internet and are the biggest users of Facebook in terms of using that platform as a source of education. So these are the people who then don't trust necessarily the establishment. So we as an industry aren't really built to serve them. We haven't really thought about how to appeal to them. We don't really worry about what their pain points are. And that's a phrase that we use a lot in this presentation. And the idea is, if we recognize their pain points and create an interaction that validates their concerns and then gives us the opportunity to show what it is we can do, then we'll have an opportunity to capture that generation's interest and ultimately work better with them.
Right. So in the work that you've done, you've also mentioned that Gen Xers report having a poor financial health and quite a bit of debt. Talk more about that.
Well, this is the generation that has a lot of student loan debt, right? It's a generation that likes to spend. They don't like to deny themselves any experiences, in spite of the fact that they know sometimes they shouldn't. The spending wins out over prudence. And they also do the same thing in many cases for their adult children. I live in Florida, and we have, up until last year in COVID, seen many parents go through the luxury suites on cruise ships, where they can book ridiculously large suites and bring in the whole family. So this is now an opportunity to provide an experience for the family, not necessarily a gift of money, which shouldn't be spent and then forgotten about, but the whole opportunity to bring everybody together. And so that's the opportunity that we see here.
Right. So you've also talked about Gen Xers being the new sandwich generation. In my mind, sandwich generation is referring to folks who are maybe caregiving for older parents, but also raising a family. Is that how you define it as well?
Agreed. Yes. Many of these people are under tremendous pressure, given their penchant for spending, as we talked about, and their appetite for experiencing opportunities. Or experiences, then there's a double demand. Not only is it a financial burden, perhaps, to care for children, as well as aging parents, but it's also a demand on their time. And that may explain one of the other reasons that they don't have an interaction with a financial advisor. They don't see it necessarily as valuable, or even if they see it as valuable, they don't think they have the time to devote to that. It seems like it's complicated. Arguably, going back to our point about financial planning and asset transfers at death, they haven't done even some of the rudimentary things that they need to, because they think it'll take too much time to get it done.
You mentioned rudimentary things. What might you be referring to there?
As simple as having a will. I mean, we would hope everybody would have a well thought out financial plan, but obviously it starts with a will, and so many Generation Xers haven't even done that.
So in the presentation, you talk about how the industry hasn't provided tools to help advisors connect with new wealth holders. Can you walk us through the assessment tool that you've developed? What does it do? How does it work? Who's it available to?
Absolutely. So we've developed this program using 8 different modules. And one of the modules is an assessment tool that'll help an advisor figure out what it is that we're actually developing and does it make sense for their business. If for example, you're a sole practitioner and you're going to sell your business in 10 years, do you really want to focus on Generation Z? Probably not. But at the same time, you can add value to your business by showing that you've got a generation resilient business model that focuses on generation X and to some extent generation Y. So we've got that type of opportunity that we uncover with our assessment tool. And then maybe you've got somebody brand new in the business and is scratching his head. Look, I just want to gather assets under management. I don't care from where I get them. But at the same time, once the business is developed and running well, we want to give the client, meaning our financial advisor, repeatable action steps to help continue to gather assets under management and bring new clients to the business.
It's interesting that you mentioned repeatable. In your deck, you talk about each generation needing to be marketed to differently and onboarded differently and serviced differently. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah. So when we talk about the generations, it's really their attitude about communication. We talked about Generation X being latchkey, taking care of themselves, being self-reliant, and really being skeptical about other people coming in and telling them what to do. They like to be in control because of their experience, right? And then you think about Generation Y, those people who are 39 and under now. These are people who grew up with full-blown internet access. They're reliant upon the internet for much of their experience. If they don't know how to do something, they'll watch a YouTube video on how to get it done. So that type of thing. And then Generation Z, of course, has all of that and more. And now, actually, they've got a completely different social experience given the last year of their lives spent really in front of a computer screen with their friends, as opposed to being in a social setting where they can interact with people. But the point of understanding each generation's desire for an appropriate communication is the key here. So what we have developed is a persona guide that lets you as an advisor examine how these people like to be talked to, if you will, communicated with, and then assess how you can implement some of these strategies into your practice. Now, the beauty of this is you don't have to do everything. I mean, there are 70 plus pages of great ideas here, but we would think that the advisor who wants to start down this path does it with the single step, as the old adage goes, right? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Identify a few things that make sense, that are easy for you to implement. If you have a team, perhaps you can assign some tasks to those people, and then continue to enjoy the fruits of that labor, because it'll be then a best practice for your business.
So if you don't mind, can you walk us through perhaps a case study of a Gen X or Y or Z that brings us home?
Oh, sure. Let's talk about Gen X, because after all, that's the biggest opportunity we have going forward. So in our deck, we have a couple with a 13-year-old daughter, and we talk about them and talk about them in relationship to the pain points that they might be experiencing, right? The other sales adage that comes to mind when you review material like this is people don't care what you know as a financial advisor until they know how much you care, right? And that's the point. So these people might very well be the epitome of the sandwich generation. As a matter of fact, in the case study, our wife's parents are doing fine, but her husband's father lives close by and actually relies on them. We've got the 13-year-old daughter who is in a private school, and they have a little bit of the keeping up with the Joneses scenario going on there. They want her to experience all that the school has to offer and all the extracurricular activities. And of course, then there's expense that goes along with that, but wearing the right clothes, driving the right car. And then they're wondering, is that really the right example to set for this child? Should we be catering to the banal, to the marketing and material, or should we talk to her about setting up boundaries and how to invest? And then, of course, Bill, that's the guy in our case study, has a dental practice. He's doing very well for himself. He just bought into a partnership, so he's very busy with that. They hardly see each other because they're both career people. And then when you talk to Jen, she doesn't even know if she's going to have an opportunity to sit down with Bill and talk about all this stuff, the time constraints that we talked about before. So as an advisor reads through this example, one of the things that he or she might take from this as a positive best practice would be to understand that any one of these things would be a great inroad, unrelated to financial advice, to give to Jane as a starting point. Maybe your company's brochure or an article you found on the internet in teaching kids about the value of money. So here's something that, based on our conversation, I thought you might find interesting to begin that conversation with your daughter. You talk about making it easy for them to meet. Perhaps it's an after-hours appointment. Sometimes we're reluctant to do that. We think about our structure. We think about our office as being the place to meet with clients. But then again, these people may prefer to meet someplace else off-site and have that initial conversation.
Mm. So in the deck, you also talk about how you can prospect for a Gen X client like Jane.
Right. Well, it's common sense, but it's not common until somebody tells you about it, right? So as you think about where you interact, now I'm speaking as a baby boomer, so I don't necessarily understand this intuitively. I have to be told. So I'm grateful that a resource like this exists. But you see people in the Gen X category all the time, and as you get to know them, now armed with the knowledge of now trying to see the world through their lens, understanding their pain points, you have an opportunity where you might be able to bring something in the conversation that your practice is good at. Teaching kids how to save for college, for example, teaching parents how to care for their aging parents. And then unrelated to the financial service industry, especially with this generation, Generation X, because it's important to win their trust first. And again, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. Right. So as we prospect, we just have to keep our eyes open. It could be, at a sporting event that you go to, meaning if you play golf, you keep your eyes open to have an opportunity to make a difference in a Gen Xer's life. If you see somebody at a chamber function or anywhere else that you go, you might want to ask if you can link with them on LinkedIn and share some articles with them that way. Comment on what they've done in terms of their posts. And I mean this sincerely. I mean, you're doing this because not only do you want to win a client, but you're also developing a personal relationship with these people. And you want to then use that as an opportunity to show them how they can get help from your practice with these pain points that they're wrestling with.
Yeah. So when you're talking to advisors in your presentation about this, and I noticed that there's a section where you talk about how the potential client prospect will Google the advisor, and how important is it that an advisor has a good presence on the web with respect?
Well, it's immensely important, as you might imagine, because I mean, certainly the successor generations, the Y and the Z, are all about what they see online. But even the Generation Xer is looking for some validation. So some recommendations, client recommendations would go a long way. And as you look at the website, and here we do have some constraints depending on what compliance requirements you're expected to live by, depending on the firm you work with. But if it just says what everybody else's says, we manage wealth, we help people grow and grow money and then transition into income and live a comfortable lifestyle. Well, that doesn't say anything to the Gen Xer. So to the extent that we can with compliance approval, we need to talk about what it is we do. And again, what it is we do is manage those pain points that the client's experiencing, not managing wealth, not being able to offer them a portfolio of equities and fixed income and asset allocation models and so on and so forth.
Right. So in your deck, you talk about something that I'm fond of talking about, which is there's one thing to attract a client. There's a whole nother thing to retain and expand the relationship with that client. Talk about what advisors can do to retain the relationship with Gen Xers.
Well, yes, Gen Xers certainly as an example, but each of the other generations require a little bit different experience, right? Generation Xers in our case study, right? They give us a few more things to key in on. They're big into music, this couple, and he actually plays in a cover band, right? So one of the things that we can do is invite these people to some kind of event, right? And we talk later on about client events as well, but this could be something small. Maybe a group of people going to go to a bar to hear a cover band that's playing a favorite band's music. Be prepared, though. We advise you that Generation X doesn't necessarily want to participate. They want to be asked, though. And it's just that it's the effort of sending out the email saying, hey, this is happening in 10 days. We'd love to have you join us. Let us know if this will work for you, is sufficient in maintaining that relationship. And again, we're having business conversations. We're having meetings on a biannual basis, at least, or maybe even quarterly, depending on the complexity of the portfolio that we're working for the client. But these are things that are in addition to those business contacts that help cement the relationship.
Right. So a New York Life Annuities wholesaler, they have the tools and expertise to help an advisor make their business generation resilient. You talk about some of those tools being the ability to assess risk and opportunities and unlock the opportunities. How does one go about assessing the risk and opportunities?
We've got as I said, a simple questionnaire. I haven't said it was simple. It is 13 questions long, and it's designed then to walk you through the thinking behind the research here and look for opportunities to strengthen your practice, to make it more generational resilient. Once the questions are answered, one scores oneself at the end, and then we provide you with a track to run on. In other words, there are 7 other modules that the advisor can use to develop their plan, their strategy for incorporating more generations into their business, not just focusing on the next generation, Generation X, for beneficiary opportunities. And then each one of these steps then follows logically with the same kind of action step, just different content for the different generations.
Right. So, Frank, I want to give our listeners a sense of what's in the modules. Do you mind just sort of going through those 7, the titles of them, and what people will get to learn from?
Oh, absolutely. I think the 2 most informative are the Persona Guidebook and then the Communications Guidebook, right? So the Persona Guidebook speaks about those obvious things, right? It really plays up the whole, this is the generation gap, here's how people view circumstances and situations differently, and then gives the advisor, again, me being the baby boomer, the opportunity to realize that's why that's on television, that's why people say it that way, that's why. And then we have an opportunity to take our understanding of that's why and incorporate it into our business. So it takes us all the way through each generation in terms of what formed them, the whole notion of the latchkey, living alone, being personally resilient, personally resourceful for a Generation X, through how they like to communicate, how they like to see what's going on. And it also addresses specifically how they make decisions. So a client can understand, an advisor, can understand when the client is hesitant, for example, in agreeing to something, it's not necessarily a no, it's just how they process and verbalize their concerns. Mm-hmm. So the Persona Guidebook then spells out all of these things for each of the generations, right? Then, of course, now that we understand what we're working with, all right, now you said I need to speak to them differently. How do I do that? So the Communications Guidebook provides the actual language. So you can take these phrases, you can incorporate them into your own communications, be they email, be they written or speaking, and understand that, yes, you do have to speak to people differently for them to understand what it is you're saying. Mm. So those are the 2 most important, I think. And then everything else builds off of what you're going to do. All right, so now let's talk about a client event. Now we have a piece on client events that gives you ideas on how to use a client event. Does it have to be a full-blown seminar versus maybe a 5 or 6 person intimate meeting, and the value of each, down to, well, what do I send out? How do I get it going? Here are some ideas for venues. It doesn't always have to be business related. So then that works through all those situations. We have an onboarding module, which talks about just that. I mean, all right, now I've decided this person's going to be a client, part of my practice. What do I do? Well, one of the things is provide them with a document that talks about everything that you've already talked about, right? And it becomes then the track for the client to run on. We'll also talk about this, I think, a little bit more later. But the onboarding communication is critical because it tells the client what their responsibilities are in the relationship, just as it lets the client know what you will do for them as a financial professional.
So, to the advisors who are listening today, what can they do immediately in their practice to start making a difference in this area?
Well, I would say get our persona guidebook so you understand what it is that you could focus on quickly. And I would argue it's probably going to be someone in the Generation X spectrum for a couple of reasons. We've already identified them as they being the biggest opportunity for us as they're next in line to inherit wealth. And then use the persona guidebook as an understanding of what it is you're supposed to do, and then move to the communications guidebook and read the section on Generation X to understand how you're going to do that. And the simplest thing you could do is perhaps spruce up your website. As we said, if you Google Frank Vilcnik, financial advisor in Delray Beach, Florida, what comes up? Is it ho-hum? To the extent that you're allowed to change things from a compliance perspective, do so. If you can talk about value add beyond financial services, that would be key for many of these people.
So obviously, I want to let our listeners know how best to learn more. Is there a website that folks can go to or a phone number to call?
Both, actually. So NewYorkLifeAnnuities.com is the website for the sales desk and also the wholesalers. And the telephone number is 888-888-474-7725. And again, you'll be in contact then with our sales desk, who can put your advisor in contact with the appropriate wholesaler, who would be happy to deliver all of these materials in actual form, not just electronically, unless, of course, that's preferred.
Right. So Frank, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that we ought to mention before we wrap up, or anything that you've already mentioned that bears reemphasizing?
Yeah, this whole thing, as I said in the conversation, is obvious now that you've heard it, right? But we as a financial services industry are so guilty of not taking care of a lot of the simple things that pay big dividends, right? There are so many modules out there provided by different vendors that talk about the same thing. How did we miss beneficiaries? How did we lose assets? One of the stats that is talked about in the presentation is 80% of heirs will likely choose a different financial advisor upon receiving those assets from those that left the earth. So when you think about that, I mean, that's not something that should happen. Using these tools here, in addition to what's already working, just tweaking your practice a little bit to incorporate some of these great ideas, will then have huge dividends for you going forward, because you won't be chasing those beneficiaries. They'll be coming to you because they've already got a relationship. And that's how you're going to be able to keep those assets under management.
Well, Frank, I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with our listeners. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or our website at www.investmentsinwealth.org/podcast to get the latest episodes of our Exceptional Advisor podcast series. For additional resources, updates on IWI events, and exclusive membership deals, visit www.investmentsinwealth.org. For additional resources and strategies to help engage with Gen X, Y, and Z, contact the New York Life Annuities Sales Desk at 888-474-7725 or visit NewYorkLifeAnnuities.com.